It started in your garage. Not with a bang or a flash of light. It started with a box. A simple cube of dark, oily metal. You found it at a flea market. The seller had no idea what it was. He thought it was some weird, failed art project. You bought it for $20. A steal, even for a paperweight. You took it home, cleaned the grime from its surface. There were no seams, no buttons, no obvious way to open it. You spent a week trying everything. Crowbars, heat guns, even pleating. Nothing worked. It was just a heavy, useless cube. You almost threw it out. Then one night, you touched it by accident, and the wall of your garage disappeared. In its place was a forest of glowing purple trees. Strange winged creatures flitted between them. You could almost feel the warm, alien air. You snatched your hand back, and the garage wall was back. Your heart hammered against your ribs. You touched the box again. A different scene appeared. The city of towering spires under two suns. You had found a window to somewhere else. For months, it was your secret obsession. You cataloged dozens of worlds, a desert of black sand, an ocean that floated in the sky. A world where geometry itself was alive. It was the greatest discovery in human history, and you told absolutely no one. Who would even believe you? This was better than television. The box showed you wonders. It never showed the same place twice. You were a tourist of the impossible. An audience of one for the grand theater of creation. You never felt any danger. The worlds were just pictures, silent movies playing on the surface of the cube. Until the day a picture looked back. It was a glimpse of a dark place, a place made of shadow and cold angles. There was no life there, just a feeling of immense ancient emptiness. You were about to pull your hand away, but then something in the darkness moved. It was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a patch of deeper blackness, a hole in the shape of a man. For a single, chilling moment, it turned. It looked right at you, not at the window, not at the box. At you. You felt its gaze across the void. A cold, analytical stare. A stare that knew your name, that knew your every secret. You ripped your hand from the box. You fell backwards onto the concrete floor. The image vanished, but the feeling did not. You were no longer watching. You had been seen. The box sat on your workbench. It was no longer a beautiful toy. It looked sinister now, a dark beacon in your quiet suburban life. You didn't touch it for 3 days. You tried to forget what you saw. You tried to pretend it was a trick of the light, a hallucination from staring too long, but you could not forget that feeling. The feeling of being cataloged, filed away. You told yourself you were being stupid. It was just a weird box, so you went about your life. You went to work. You talked to your neighbors about the weather. You pretended everything was normal. But a new color was creeping into your world, a dull, lifeless gray. At first, it was subtle. The vibrant red of a stop sign seemed faded. The bright green of a lawn looked washed out. You thought your eyes were playing tricks. Maybe you needed glasses. But then sounds began to fade. The morning bird song was muffled. The roar of traffic was a distant hum. It was like the volume of the world was being slowly turned down. You stood in your kitchen. The smell of coffee was gone. The bright yellow of a banana on the counter was just pale gray. Fear, cold and sharp, finally cut through your denial. This was not in your head. Your world was being unmade. It was being erased, turned into nothing but silent gray dust. You knew the cause. It was the thing in the dark place, the thing that saw you. It wasn't just looking, it was reaching out. It was unwriting your reality. You ran to the garage, to the box. You had to do something. You couldn't just stand by and fade away. The world outside your window was already a ghost of itself, a world of ash and silence. You put your hand on the cube. not with curiosity this time, but with sheer animal desperation. The box didn't show you a picture. It showed you a door, a swirling vortex of light and color. It was chaotic and terrifying, a stark contrast to the gray emptiness consuming your home.
The box was offering you an escape, a blind leap into the unknown. There was no guarantee of survival, no promise of a safe landing, but it was better than the alternative, better than becoming a forgotten whisper, better than being dust. You took a deep breath. The air had no taste, no substance. You looked at your hands. The color was draining from them, too. There was no more time. You stepped through the vortex and left your entire universe behind. The transition was not pleasant. It felt like being pulled apart and put back together. Every atom of your body screamed in protest. Then silence and light. So much light. You opened your eyes. You were standing on a street, but it wasn't made of asphalt. It was made of solid, glowing crystal. You were in a city of impossible beauty. Towers of pure light spiraled into a sky of soft lavender. Bridges of woven energy connected floating platforms. A gentle humming sound filled the air. It was a symphony of peace and order. After the silent gray of your fading home, it was overwhelming. Your senses came rushing back. The air was clean and sweet. You looked at your hands. The color was there. The small scar on your knuckle, the lines on your palm. You were real again. You were solid. You let out a laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. It probably sounded a little unhinged. You didn't care. You were alive. You had escaped. Then a voice spoke in your mind, not with words, but with feelings, with concepts. "Welcome, traveler." The voice was calm, ancient, profoundly sad. You looked around. There was no one there. The streets were empty. The city was pristine. But it felt uninhabited, like a perfect museum. "We are the builders of this place," the voice continued. "We saw you arrive. We have seen others like you before." 3 figures began to form out of the light. They were tall and slender. They had no faces, no features, just elegant shapes made of solidified energy. They glowed with a gentle internal luminescence. "You come from a fallen world," the lead figure communicated. "A world claimed by the ceaseless end." "The what?" you tried to ask, but your thoughts were read before you could speak. "It is the great enemy, the shadow that follows all light, the silence that consumes all songs. It does not destroy, it erases. It makes it so that nothing ever was." You stared at the light beings. You understood now. The gray dust, the fading sounds. It was an unmaking, a cosmic deletion. The being that saw you through the box, it was a servant of this ceaseless end. "Why me?" your mind screamed. "Why my world?" "Because you looked," the being replied, its light dimming slightly. "The box you carry is a key that opens doors between the layers of what is. The end is drawn to such things. It hunts for them. It follows the echoes they leave. And now, it follows you. You are not safe here. You are not safe anywhere." One of the other beings glided forward. It offered a concept of a helping hand, an image of a path. "We cannot fight the end. Our nature is to build, to create order. The end is perfect order of another kind, the order of zero. But we can offer you knowledge. There is a place here, a place of memory, an archive of all that has been lost. They called it the Library of Lost Minds. A rather dramatic name, you thought, but given the circumstances, it seemed appropriate. They told you it held the final thoughts of 1,000 fallen worlds. Within that chorus of the dead, you might find a weakness, a pattern, a way to fight back, a way to stop running.
You followed the light beings through the silent, beautiful city. You felt like a ghost walking through a dream. It was hard to believe any of this was real. But the memory of your fading home was still raw. The terror was still fresh. This was no dream. This was your new, terrifying reality. They led you to the base of the largest crystalline spire. A door of pure energy dissolved at their approach. "We can only show you the way," the first being said. "The journey inside is yours alone. Good luck, Echo Walker. You have the unfortunate honor of being interesting." You stepped inside. The door sealed behind you. You were in a vast, dark chamber. The only light came from millions of tiny floating motes. They drifted through the air like dust in a sunbeam. Each mote, you realized, was a soul, a memory, a single fading consciousness from a world that was no more. This wasn't a library, it was a mausoleum. The light beings had told you what to do. You had to open your mind, let the memories in, sift through the final moments of countless civilizations. Somewhere in that cosmic graveyard was a secret, a weapon, or at least the blueprint for one. You took a deep breath and you reached out with your thoughts. It was like opening a floodgate. A billion voices screamed into your head at once, the final moments of worlds being erased, the terror, the confusion, the despair. You saw empires turn to dust. You felt the love of families fading into gray nothingness. You lived 1,000,000,000,000 deaths in a single instant. The pain was absolute. It almost broke you, but you held on. You had to. You focused on your own world, the memory of a green lawn, the taste of coffee, the sound of rain on a window. You anchored yourself to the life you had lost, and you began to search. You pushed aside the raw emotion. You looked for data, for patterns, for anything that wasn't just fear and sorrow. It took an eternity, or maybe just an hour. Time had no meaning in this place. You sifted through the final reports of alien experts, the last prayers of starborn priests, the dying whispers of kings and janitors. They all spoke of the same thing: a creeping, silent erasure, the ceaseless end. But they used another name for its agents, for the things that did the hunting. You found the name, repeated in 100 different tongues. It was a concept more than a word, a being of focused void, a predator that fed on reality itself. The hound of nothing. That was the thing you saw, the thing in the darkness, the thing that was now hunting you across the multiverse. This library was a nice place to visit, but the checkout process seemed terrible. You dove deeper into the oldest memories in the archive, from worlds that fell eons ago. And there you found it, a flicker of something else, not just terror, defiance. One civilization long since erased had tried to fight back. They had failed, but in their final records they spoke of a weakness, a flaw in the enemy's perfect logic. The ceaseless end was absolute order, perfect, silent, nullity. It could not understand chaos. It could not process true randomness. Unpredictability was a weapon against it, a weapon of last resort. But how do you weaponize chaos? The records were fragmented. The answer was incomplete. But they mentioned a place you could build such a weapon. A universe that was already dead. A graveyard of 1,000,000,000 stars. A place where the laws of physics had broken down completely. A realm of pure, untamed chaos. The perfect forge for a weapon of hope. The library had given you a destination. It had given you a sliver of a chance. You had the name of your enemy and the hint of its weakness. As the knowledge settled in your mind, a new feeling washed over you, a cold, sharp presence. It was the same feeling you had in your garage, the feeling of being watched. But this time it was closer, much closer. The motes of light in the library began to flicker violently. The silent hum of the chamber was replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated in your bones. It had found you. The Hound of Nothing was here. You pulled your mind back from the archive. The sensory overload vanished. You were back in the dark chamber, but it was no longer calm. The air was thick with menace. The floating motes of light were extinguishing one by one, plunging the vast room into an ever deeper darkness. You were running out of time. The voice of the crystal being echoed in your head, urgent and strained. It comes, the hunter. You have drawn its gaze to us. Our city of light cannot stand against such a shadow. The calm sadness in its voice was gone, replaced by something you recognized. Fear. Even beings made of pure light could feel fear. You had to get out. You still had the box, the window, the door. You fumbled for it in your pocket. Your hands were shaking. The growling sound was louder now. It was not coming from any single direction. It was coming from everywhere at once. The very fabric of this reality was groaning under some immense pressure. You held the box tight. You didn't try to choose a destination. You just pushed your will into it. Anywhere but here. Anywhere the hound was not. You could feel the creature's approach. It wasn't moving through space. It was simply asserting its presence. An intrusion of absolute void into a world of pure light. Cracks began to form along the crystalline walls of the library. Not physical cracks. They were lines of absolute blackness, veins of nothing spreading through the structure. The light of the city outside was dimming. The beautiful symphony of energy was turning into a discordant funeral dirge. You had brought ruin to this perfect place. A section of the far wall didn't just crack, it dissolved. It became a perfect circular hole, a hole that led to nowhere. From that hole, the Hound of Nothing began to emerge. It wasn't a dog, it wasn't a wolf. It was a mockery of a living thing. A four-legged shape sculpted from the void itself. It had no eyes, no mouth. Just a form that absorbed all light and all hope. The box in your hand grew warm. A vortex of swirling colors erupted in front of you, your escape route. But it was unstable, flickering. The hound took a step out of its portal of nothingness. The crystal floor beneath its paws ceased to exist. It left footprints of pure void. It turned its featureless head toward you. It knew you were there. It could smell your reality. Your existence was an insult to its nature. The light beings sent one last thought, a feeling of grief and a direction, a whisper of star coordinates, for the graveyard universe, the place from the records. Go, avenge us. Avenge the billion minds in this tomb. Then their presence in your mind vanished, snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. You didn't hesitate. You didn't look back. You dove headfirst into the swirling portal. Just as the Hound of Nothing let out a silent roar, a roar that shattered the very concept of sound. You felt it in your soul, a promise of absolute erasure. The hunt was on, and you were the fox. It was a terrible promotion from Guy in a Garage. You tumbled through the space between worlds again, a chaotic, violent journey. This time you were not an explorer, you were a fugitive. The hound's presence had been branded onto your mind. You could feel it, a distant cold spot, a hunter on your trail. It could feel your footprints across the realities. You could run, but you could no longer hide. The portal spat you out. You landed hard on something that wasn't quite solid. It was a surface of churning gray mist. You stood up coughing. The air tasted of ozone and regret. The world around you was a nightmare, a graveyard, just as the records had promised. You were floating on a shard of rock in an endless black void. But the void was not empty. It was filled with the corpses of stars. White dwarfs, flickering like dying embers, neutron stars spinning silently, black holes waiting patiently, and stretching out before you, the skeletal remains of galactic arms, trillions of dead suns, a universe that had suffered heat death and kept on going. There was no up or down, no north or south, just an infinite expanse of cosmic death. This was the graveyard of 1 billion stars, the place the library had sent you, the forge for your weapon of chaos. It was the most depressing place you had ever seen. But it was also the only place in the multiverse you might be safe. For a little while. The hound could not easily hunt here. The laws of reality were frayed and broken. It was a place of true chaos.
Trying to track you here would be like trying to follow footprints in an earthquake.
You finally had a moment to breathe, a moment to think. You had a mission. You had a destination. You had a very, very angry dog made of nothing on your tail. You looked at the box in your hand. It was just a metal cube again, cool to the touch. Your key. Your burden. This little object had destroyed your life. It had gotten your entire world erased. It had led a monster to a city of peaceful light beings. You hated it. But it was also the only thing keeping you alive. You sat on the edge of the rock shard. You dangled your feet over an abyss of dead galaxies. You needed a weapon made from the chaos of this dead universe. The library's records had been clear. The ceaseless end was perfect order, so you had to become perfect disorder. Human unpredictability. That was your only advantage.
You had no idea how to build a reality-breaking weapon. You were not an engineer. You were not a star science expert. You were just a guy. A guy who bought a weird box at a flea market, but you had the knowledge of 1,000 dead worlds in your head. You had the coordinates for this place, and you had a very strong motivation not to be erased. It was time to get to work. First step, figure out how to not float away into eternal blackness. That seemed like a good start.